All right, it is time for our next Wheel of Fortune component, and this one is doing the bulk of the work for showing the user what is going on. And this is what we're calling the draw spaces component. And we are going to display to the user all of the wrong guesses, and we are also going to display placeholders on the screen, similar to what Wheel of Fortune does with the the white squares that turn around when you guess a letter. And this is a function that you are going to define yourself. So this is not part of a magic function in Khan Academy. I got my screen a little off, sorry. So there is my draw spaces function. And I'm going to need a new global variable up here. And I'm going to call it spaces, and it's going to be an array. And it is going to hold placeholders for each of the letters in my chosen word. So the first thing I'm going to do up here at the top is actually initialize spaces with a placeholder. So just like we did when key pressed, when we were checking to see if a letter existed, we're going to loop over each letter in Mustangs. So var I is going to start at 0, I is less than chosen word dot length, and I plus plus. Now, for each letter in chosen word, I'm going to push something to spaces, and in this case, I'm going to use just a kind of a generic string that just I'm going to know that means it's a placeholder. And so we can't see this right now, but spaces now holds a space with an underscore followed by a space for each of the letters in Mustang. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of these, right? So spaces is going to hold all of that. And so when we come down here to draw spaces, we are going to be interacting with that spaces array. But draw spaces is actually going to need to be called somewhere. So key pressed gets called whenever the user presses a key. But the way we're going to have our game work repeatedly is we are actually going to use the draw function. Whoops, fill that in for me. And this is how we're gonna. This is gonna take the place of the forever loop that we would have had like in Hangman when we built it in Snap. And so this is gonna cause the game to run over and over, so the user can give us lots of input. And so in here, I am just going to call draw spaces, and that's all I'm going to do for right now with my my draw loop, and we'll come back to it. But that's just how we're going to call draw spaces. Now, before we get into what we're actually going to display in draw spaces, now that we have something where we are using placeholders for each of the letters in the chosen word, we actually want to do something new here, right? So anytime we get to a word that get to a letter in the chosen word that is the same as what the user has just guessed with string, we are actually going to put that in the correct place in spaces. And this might not be immediately obvious what's happening here. So let's just go over what happens in key pressed again. So every time a key is pressed, we loop through all the letters in chosen word one at a time. So as we know right now, chosen word is Mustang, so it's going to start at M. So let's say that the letter that I typed was M. And so we're at the 0 index, and we're going to say, oh, key.toString, that's M. That is the same as the 0 index of the chosen word, that's M. So let's actually set spaces at the 0 index to M. So whereas right now we have a placeholder for M and U and all the letters in spaces. This is an array holding a placeholder for all the letters in the chosen word, right? Well, when a letter is guessed correctly, then we're going to replace the placeholder with the correct guess. And this is going to be important to what we end up doing inside draw spaces, and it's actually going to make the logic in draw spaces pretty simple. And so we're just going to leave this here. There isn't really a visual to demonstrate this just yet, but there's going to be in a moment. So let's just start putting together draw spaces, and we'll focus on the logic, and then we'll get some output to the screen here in just a minute. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to draw a background, and we're going to do that because draw spaces is going to get called over and over and over again, but what we're going to print is going to change each time. So let's put that in there, and I'll show you what it would look like if we didn't have that. And then I'm just going to set a text size so it's a little bigger than what I had before. Now, for each item in spaces, so let's loop through I is less than spaces dot length. So we're going to loop through spaces, and if we have a placeholder, so if spaces at this index is equal to, and if you remember, I used that funny special value, whoops, to represent a placeholder. So if it's that funny special value, then I'm going to do something. If it's anything else, then I'm going to do something different. And if we remember what anything else would be, I've replaced any correct guesses in spaces. So this is going to be all of the right stuff. So let's think about what we want to draw when spaces is just a placeholder. So I'm thinking a rectangle is what we want, just a simple square on the screen, similar to the way we have in Wheel of Fortune. So let's just draw a simple gray rectangle, and let's start off by just drawing it at 100, 100, and it's probably going to be, well, let's see how big that is, and let's just see what that looks like. Now, that all looks like one rectangle for me, but let's just prove that it isn't. So what did I just change there? Well, it's drawing the rectangle at 100 plus I times 30. So each item gets drawn 30 spaces over. And I'm actually going to go ahead and take this and turn it into a variable. So let's just call it spaces x position, and let's actually set it to 25 for now. And let's use that instead. And it's going to become clear why this is going to be useful in a second when we start trying to draw the correct guesses in there. But let's just do a quick test. And let's guess. So I've clicked in here and I'm just gonna guess a letter that I know appears in the word. So when I guess M, oh, M went away, and U, and if I type T, then T goes away, and G. Okay, so anytime I guess a correct letter, then the correct position goes away. So that tells us that the things we have here in key pressed is working correctly. So that's good. But we're not, what we want to actually do is replace that correct guess into the word itself. So let's do that with some black text. And we're going to need to use that X position as well. So let's just draw the text of the letter that is in that position, right? And let's draw it at the spaces X position, just like we were before, plus I times 30, so we want it to be in line, and for the Y, I was setting the Y at 100. And let's do that. And that's off a little bit, so let's set at 120. So let's restart. I'm going to just click restart the game. So now we have just blank spaces. So spaces is full of the placeholders, and if I type a U, boom, I get a U, and if I type a G, the G gets replaced. So let's just refresh ourselves on what our logic here in draw spaces. So draw spaces is getting called constantly, and every time the draw loop runs. So over and over and over again. Every time it redraws the background. If it weren't to redraw the background, we get something funny. In fact, let's just show ourselves what that would look like. So let's restart. If I type a U and a G and a T, we get this kind of funkiness. Because everything's just being drawn on top of each other. So if we draw the backgrounds each time, it gets refreshed, which is what we want. So we draw our background, and then for each item in spaces, so we loop over spaces, if at that index we have a placeholder, draw the rectangle. Otherwise, if we don't have a placeholder at that index, that means it's a correct guess. So let's print the correct guess instead. This is actually pretty simple. And we also want to be doing something with our wrong guesses. So as you know, we're keeping track of them in this variable. So let's print those on the screen as well. So I is less than wrong guesses dot length, and let's make them black. So and I'm just gonna put them as text. So for each one, I'm just gonna print them. So let's print wrong guesses for that index, and just like for the spaces, we need to move each of them over. So let's just start at the same X position, I think, and I could probably give that a better name. And just like we did before, we need to give it an offset, but probably let's give it the same offset and see how it looks. And then for the Y position, I think I want it a little lower, so let's just do it. Let's do it at 300 for now. Now, let's restart, and I'm going to guess Y. Great. And T, okay, so that still works. And H, so I have something wrong. Oh, I have a typo here. Instead of typing I typed 1. Let's guess X, that's not in there. E, that's not in there. M, U, S. Great. So we now have something to print all of our wrong guesses down here and our correct guesses up here. I think it's a little confusing to not tell the user what the wrong guesses are. I think it's clear what the right guesses are because they're actually getting replaced with placeholders. But I'm just gonna put a little piece of helper text in there. And let's say text, let's call it wrong guesses, and let's do it at spaces X position, and instead of 300, let's do it at 275, and probably it could be a little smaller, so let's we had it at 30, let's make it 20. And maybe I'm going to make it a little bit higher. Whoops. There we go. So the wrong guesses and the placeholders. And if I guess a, whoops, I need to click into my canvas. If I guess a G, I see a G. If I guess an H, it goes there under wrong guesses. So that's really it for the very simple display. Now, as you can see, this is not the whole game yet. We're going to have 2 more components for checking to see if we've won or lost, and it's not very attractive, right? And so you'll see in the rubric that there's a lot of bonus functionality for making this just a little cooler. But this is most of the functionality that you're going to need to just get the very basic version of the game working. So that's it for this, and we'll see you for the next screencast for checking to see if we've won or lost.